Hi Harsh.
Hello, good evening.
Hello. Good evening. Hoping you're
Good
doing
evening.
well.
Good evening. I'm doing pretty well. Thanks for asking. How about you?
Yeah, we all are doing well, and all of us were really looking forward to this session being hosted by you. So, as you know, for the topic today, we are going to discuss DevOps and site reliability engineering. So, Debelina is here with us. Debelina is from Team Diversion as well, and she is going to be moderating the session today. So,
Hmm.
without further ado, I'll leave it to you both.
Awesome. Sounds great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Vedant, and thank you, sir. Sir, welcome to Diversion 2023. Good evening, sir. Sir, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Thanks for asking. How about you?
I'm fine too. Good evening to
Awesome.
you, and good evening to everyone who is watching this. So, how many of you want to delve into the huge ocean of open source? Many of you, right? So, let us all welcome the guest of today, Mr. Bardhan Mishra. He is an engineer at LocalStack. He is also a Google Season of Docs technical writer and developer, administrator in Moza Global. He has previously participated in Google Summer of Code and Season of Docs and MLH Fellowship programs. He is a hackathon enthusiast and has won in several hackathons like Capgemini, MLH Fellow Sprint 0, Sprint 5, Hack with Infinity 2.0, etc. He has also been an administrator and mentor for several hacking contests in India. Beside development and hackathons, he has greatly contributed in open source and worked in various domains like DevOps, cloud, etc. So let us all welcome him. Sir, I would like you to address the audience with a few words, please.
Sure. So first of all, thanks a lot for joining this session, and thanks for the gentle introduction, Debelina. So I guess in the past, like couple of years, I have extensively worked out in the open source domain, which corresponds to web engineering, DevOps, site reliability engineering, and a lot of other things as well. So it is quite great, and I guess Diversion is a like an open source event, and I guess I have been associated with various open source events for the past couple of years, and it is quite good to see that open source has been taking up quite a pace in the whole Indian university landscape. Because if I just happen to go back, like let's say 4 or 5 years back, open source was not that popular back then, and it was pretty much focused towards one single open source program that a lot of people found quite competitive to actually get into, and that was Google Summer of Code. But now the whole process has quite democratized. Like there are plenty of universities, colleges, tech clubs, societies, and all who are organizing these smaller open source programs where you get the chance to contribute to some really good open source projects. And I guess this is pretty much strengthening the engineering culture within our Indian colleges as well. People are not as beginner as like most of the other folks in the industry expect. They are the ones who are taking a charge of a lot of different projects. They are contributing to a lot of different open source stuff. They're also participating in hackathons, building some really cool stuff out there. And I guess this is contributing to the overall development in the quality of engineers that we're trying to like build up right now. And I'm glad to be present over here and share some of my thoughts, whatever I practically know about DevOps, site reliability engineering, open source, and all of that. So yeah, I guess that would be pretty much it.
Thank you, sir, for a very useful session. Now, sir, I would like to ask a few questions to you. So,
Yeah,
first of
definitely.
all, what inspired you to choose this career path?
Sounds great. So I guess I can talk a few words about my own college and the kind of landscape we had over there. So I came from a university. It's called Satyabhama University, and it's based out of Chennai. And it was pretty much a new environment for me because I didn't do that well in my joint entrance examinations, and I guess that's the case for a lot of the students who are trying to get into some top tier institutes and colleges. And once these things don't work out, you simply have to go to a university or a college that is not up to your liking. But Satyabhama University had a different case altogether. It was quite a reputed university, and I guess a lot of people from a lot of different parts of the country were participating over there. And the first couple of years were simply quite hazy. Like you were involved in academics, you were involved into like some college level stuff, and you were simply not able to figure out what you should be really doing. But one thing that I simply figured out is that if you stay like within the college boundaries and if you don't explore yourself, you will be a sitting duck by the time you actually graduate. because you will be completely left at the mercy of your university to basically find a company for you, get you placed over there, and all of that. And this is not a situation I wanted to be in. And I'm glad that I made a decision, because when I see my college mates right now, most of them have placed into some okayish companies after the placement. And now with this whole recession and layoffs coming up, most of them are literally fighting to keep their jobs. So this was a situation I was in, and there were a lot of paths for me to basically choose from. A lot of people who are in this situation, they try to pick up like something like, let's say, improving their skill sets. But now the question was like, what skills I should ideally pick up? Should I literally focus upon DSA and competitive coding? Back in my second year of college, I was literally quite good at that. I participated in a lot of contests, and I was pretty decent like in solving those problems. But still, the whole idea of like solving hundreds and hundreds of problems until and unless you graduate, that didn't seem quite fit well with me. The next path was obviously developing your own projects. And since I was trying to dabble with a lot of different tools and technologies, I got a really good head start with like developing projects out there. And it was a welcome move from my side, because now I was developing these projects. And using that, I started going to different hackathons. I started presenting those projects. And this got me a very good experience with how real time software development works and how you should be collaborating with other fellow developers. So, in many of the cases, I was working out with my seniors, and that got me a very good experience. But now there was this one fine day when I was sitting in my library and I was trying to follow with a Python course, when one of my seniors came up to me and he said, like, okay, whatever you're doing, it won't exactly work out. So I was like, I just pulled off my headphones. I said to him, like, okay, what do you imply by that? And he's like, okay, no matter how many projects you develop, no matter how many skills you're trying to do or how many languages you try to learn, it won't do you exactly good if you don't show the kind of the tangible impact that you're creating. So I asked, like, how do I basically show that kind of an impact? And he was like, okay, you can basically try doing internships. You can try to get into open source programs, because this is a place where you can get some real world experience and you can get to show, like, these are my skills and this is how I apply them in some real world context. Now, getting an internship back at that time was literally tough for me because there were no companies coming to the college. And I had simply no idea about how to approach different companies out there and how to basically get selected into them. So the option that was left was open source. And coincidentally, the month was of October. And I guess most of the people who are into open source know what the month of October is about. It's called Hacktoberfest. And this is a program that is being run by DigitalOcean, where you get to contribute to different open source projects out there. So I was like, okay, this looks cool to me. And the very thought of like getting some swags and all of these things literally got me into the whole thing. And I started contributing to Hacktoberfest itself. And coincidentally, like my senior who advised me back at that day, he actually went to become the second Google Summer of Code student from our college. So he participated in the OVAS program. So I should like really credit him to like get me started with that, because if he was not there, I would never have like trusted open source so much to basically get started. But now I participated in Hacktoberfest. Getting the cue from that, I started participating in much smaller open source programs. This is the same thing that I guess Diversion is also organizing. So back then, there were several smaller scale open source programs. But through that, I got some really good mentors who were ready to help me out, who were ready to guide me, and basically tell me like what kind of skills I should really acquire and how I should basically apply them in real world context. And this basically culminated me into getting into MLH Fellowship. So I guess like I was one of the fellows in the batch one. And this got me a very good experience that, okay, this is how things really work out. This is how you should be basically collaborating. And this was one of my first entries into some real world software development. After MLH Fellowship, I guess I had a pretty good context about what I should be doing. So I got into several open source programs like Google Summer of Code, Google Season of Docs. And parallelly, I started like helping out other people in order to help them get started with the same things. I was also doing some of the internships back then, because as the profile develops, you will get to see that companies will approach you, or you will have a really solid background to keep applying at different companies. And this is what made me work at several companies like Red Hat, HackerRank, QuantSight, Nethermind, and more of that. And by the time I graduated, almost last year itself, I had a pretty good idea about what I would be working in and what are the different things I want to work on for the next couple of years. And that's how my entire career path has basically forged.
Thank you, sir, so much. Sir, we all know that you are a great like contributor in the open source. Like you have a lot of experience in the open source domain. So there are
Mhm.
many engineers now that who want to work in this domain. So what
Yeah.
are the tools and tips that they should follow so that they can develop and build a career in this domain?
Awesome. That sounds pretty great to start with. So first of all, to set the context, I guess there are different kinds of people who try to contribute to open source projects. The very first kind of people that I have mostly came across in really professional open source development are the ones who are actually using the tool, who have found out a simple bug or a regression or something like that, and they want to make sure that it is fixed. Let's take an example. Uh, you're using an open source project, like let's say X, and one fine day you came to know that, okay, this should work out in this manner, but it is not working out. Something has changed over the time. And now you figure out that X open, like the code base for the project X is completely open source. So all that you can do is to simply go to that code base. You can open the commit history. You can get to see that, okay, in the past 24 hours, this has changed and it has actually broke the flow. So what you can basically do is like you can try to fix that flow yourself because you value the project quite much. And you think that by fixing this particular bug or fixing this particular issue, or maybe if you have thought about a particular feature, you will be able to create some value for that project. This is what most of the people use to get started with open source development. And this is what has actually culminated into some really great open source projects as well. If you go into any project like, let's say, Linux or Git, or let's say Firefox, these are massive projects right now. And most of them are driven by people who were actually using that project. And even if you like, once you get into some real world, once you get some real world experience and you figure out that there is a bug or there is a feature that this project particularly needs, you will be quite motivated because you will have the required skills to actually contribute to such a project. So that's the first instance of it. The second one are the people who are actually trying to get some sort of a sponsorship or a funding to basically contribute to open source project. And this is where various professionals or various students can also get into. Programs like Google Summer of Code, Google Season of Docs, Outreach Internships, Igalia Coding Experience, like all of these programs support this very notion that you should try to get some funding so that you can keep contributing to open source in a sustainable manner. And the keyword here is sustainability, because no matter how enthusiastic you are, how motivated you are, you simply cannot keep on contributing to some project like every now and then, because contributing to projects is mostly regarded as a volunteer effort, but you simply cannot like overlook your primary job or your primary objectives that you want to simply accomplish. The third kind of people are the ones who are trying to learning stuff, and these are the people who struggle a lot with open source, because the because the very situation here is that they don't have enough experience with coding, they don't have enough experience with software development, and now they're trying to contribute and now they're trying to understand a code base that is pretty much going beyond whatever they have seen until now. So we see that in the case of Indian colleges and universities, especially people who are trying to contribute open source, people are trying to mix the last two ways. They are beginners, they don't have much experience with coding or with software development, and they're trying to look out for sustainable modes of development because they simply want to get into open source programs, they want to get some tags, they want to get some really good stipend, and I guess this is something that helps them bag a better opportunity. And it has been quite true in my case. But if you don't have enough software development experience, I guess this is just going to backfire upon you, because most of the times you won't be able to understand the code base, you won't be able to understand the project, and things will simply fly above your head. I can give an example for that. So the first time I wrote a GSOC proposal was back in 2020. And by then I had simply done, I guess, almost two internships. One was a very simple one, like doing some WordPress and PHP stuff. Uh, the other one was like somewhere around, I guess it was like on backend development. But I was simply not confident enough about like whether I will be able to pull out this project successfully or not. So in this case, I wrote a proposal. I was ready to submit it out to my mentor. So basically, we need to submit it through a simple organization website. And on the last date itself, I simply pulled out my proposal. I decided that I won't be exactly submitting this. And when I look at my proposal once again, almost 2 years since that whole situation occurred, I simply cringe looking at that proposal because what I was proposing was quite stupid. It was not even well planned out. It was not even well architectured. And I was pretty sure that my mentor would have rejected that proposal if I would have submitted it. But since I didn't submit the GSOC proposal, I got a lot of time to explore myself. I got into a really good internship at one of the startups in Bangalore. I got into MLH Fellowship, and I guess all of these things contributed to my software development experience. So once you have that software development experience, I guess things become very easy for you. So my singular tip for anyone who is looking to get started into open source is to actually develop some sort of a software development experience. Because if you don't have software development experience, things are going to really, really trouble you a lot. Because you won't be able to understand any code base. You won't be able to understand how the contribution flow works like. You won't be able to understand what open source practices go on. And all of this like will simply contribute to imposter syndrome. You will simply think that, okay, this thing is not exactly for me. I should really look onto something else, or I should really do something extra. So just focus upon your software development skills. And no matter how many videos you watch of open source or about how to contribute using Git and GitHub, real-time software development skills can actually be like developed while you're trying to develop projects, while you're doing some internships, or even contributing to some college project. This is how you should develop your skill, and this is how you should apply in real world context. I hope that helps.
Thank you, sir. Sir, your words were quite great. So next is that, like, you are quite, as you are quite experienced in this domain, I would like to ask you more questions on this. Like, how has been your experience in the open source community as a student and now as an OS
Mhm.
engineer? Sir, can you please highlight some points on this question?
Sure, definitely. So I guess like most of the open source communities actually view students in quite neutral to a negative light. So I will be very honest about this. And if you happen to go into any large open source community and you get to see that some students are trying to contribute to it, there is a stereotype that most of the Indian students like want to contribute to some open source community because they just want to get into Google Summer of Code, or because there might be some university credits associated with it. And this is a very negative tone, because when we see open source communities quite a lot, especially the ones which are not maintained quite well or which don't have D and I initiatives, they're not exactly welcoming for a lot of new contributors. And people like who are really some good hackers, like people who can just get into a code base, who can figure out things themselves, people who are really hands-on with like version control system, with GitHub, with CI/CD pipelines. I guess they are the ones who actually get started with open source in quite a well manner. But people who don't have the exposure to like these kind of stuff beforehand, they actually struggle quite a lot. But now with this whole democratization of open source programs, and especially with the whole like changing landscape, so basically if you are an engineer right now, you will definitely see one thing is that a lot of open source companies are booming in the industry right now. So there is a startup accelerator that is called as Y Combinator. I'm not sure how many of you have heard about it. But if you happen to go and check on some of the companies that got accepted into Y Combinator, basically which attracted Y Combinator's attention and funding, most of them are happening to be like open source companies, people who are completely developing their products in open source. So now open source projects are attracting a lot of funding, a lot of attention. And this is basically like ensuring that most of these open source communities actually have a proper community management. They actually have D&I initiatives like diversity and inclusion, and all of these things, which can exactly make sure that a lot of students and a lot of people will find it literally easy to start with any open source community. So there are a lot of good examples for this. Like there is Kubernetes, there is CNCF, and I guess Diversion had a session with CNC with one of the CNCF ambassadors as well. So these communities are basically the like the torchbearer of like how the D&I initiatives really work out in open source communities, and making sure that anyone, no matter you're a student, no matter you're a professional, no matter you're someone like who is a veteran or someone who's retired from technology, everyone has a place in the open source community, and everyone will get the opportunity to contribute to open source projects. With that said, there are a few caveats to this. The very first thing that the students, especially students, because these are the ones with whom I mostly interact with, they should literally focus not to stress too much on the beginner point. We understand that you are a beginner. We understand you don't have a lot of experience. We understand that you need some like spoon feeding and you need some guidance to get started. But just branding yourself as a beginner without doing any sort of a preliminary research or like understanding about what the project is, how the project works, it won't exactly do good on you, especially with larger projects like, let's say, Kubernetes. I see a lot of people starting with Kubernetes, but the problem is that most of the people who are starting with this don't even understand what Kubernetes exactly is, or what is the business problem that it is solving, or what is its exact purpose in the technical field. Like I have known people who say that they know Kubernetes without even understanding how Bash is scripting or how to like set up a simple application load balancer. This is simply counterintuitive, because you should not like take so much of a leaps in a way that you simply don't understand the thing that you're trying to do. So always have a good understanding about what you're picking up on. If something doesn't make sense, then it is perfectly okay for you to ask those questions so that people who are experienced with this can basically help you out. But just don't leave out upon the essentials. Do a bit of a research, understand what the projects are, how the code base works. And now that you have some specific questions, maybe you can ask those questions to the maintainers, to the mentors, or whoever is the one responsible for taking care of that project. So I guess this is how you can basically get started with an open source project. Pick up on a project, pick up just get to see what this project does, what is its exact purpose. And once you happen to figure that out, maybe pick up on the code base, maybe pick up on the documentation or whatever areas that you would like to contribute to. Maybe clone that project, maybe experiment something around it, and then you will get to see that, okay, this is how things are exactly working out. And this is what you can basically use to get started with that particular open source organization. I guess that helps out.
Thank you, sir. Sir, next I would like to jump into a different topic as you are
Mhm.
quite well versed in DevOps as well. So I'd like to
Yep.
ask you a question like, which is better, SRE or DevOps?
Okay, so that's a pretty interesting question, and I guess there are a lot of misconceptions about it as well. So basically, I can take upon the story itself about how DevOps exactly came up to be. So many people will find it interesting and quite intriguing to know that DevOps isn't exactly a job role. DevOps is basically a field. It's basically a combination of cultural philosophies, practices, and tools, which can enable an organization to basically ship their applications fast. So maybe to just reiterate upon this, we can understand how the whole DevOps story has kind of looked like. So almost like, let's say, maybe go 2 or maybe 3 decades back, there were engineering teams, and these engineering teams had a lot of different components. There were developers, there were quality assurance engineers, there were operations engineers, there were security engineers, there were a lot of myriad of people out there. And the main problem with all of these people was that there was a wall between them. Like all of these groups of people, they simply kept themselves in a silo, a container, or whatever you are basically calling this. And these different silos were divided by multiple invisible walls. These walls were further enforced by the cultural hierarchies that a lot of different companies have. So let us say you're trying to build out an application. The client has given you a specification that this is the application that we actually need. The developers start building it out in their own silo. They implement all the features, they fix out all the bugs that they find. They implement everything necessary that is required to make sure that the application's business logic is nailed down. Once they happen to complete it, they will just throw the application above the wall to the quality assurance engineers. Now, these people are the ones who will just see the application and they will say, like, okay, this doesn't exactly make any sense to me. But since it works out, because every component is tightly integrated into each other, we can just say that the builds are passing and we can pass it to the operations engineers. So once again, they just happen to approve it. They will throw it above the wall to the operations. And now they will say, like, no way we can maintain this in the production. So what they will do is, like, they will just, since they don't have a communication with the development and with the quality assurance, they will just make sure that the application's production deployment is set up, and that's pretty much it. Now, the managers, when they present this application to the client, they will say, like, this is nothing that we have expected. We have given you a complete different specifications and you have given a different product altogether. And now this whole thing will go back to the developers. From developers, it will go back to the quality assurance. From quality assurance, it will go back to the operations. And this whole vicious cycle will simply continue from on and on. So there is this problem that the developers should basically coordinate with the quality assurance. They should coordinate with the operations. They should coordinate with the security. They should coordinate with the business outcomes so that they can make sure that the application is being shipped confidently. And this is where people actually thought of building out the DevOps practices. So there is development, there is operations. Once you happen to combine them, you will get DevOps. And as I said before, DevOps isn't a job role. It isn't like a functionary role or something around that. It's just a cultural philosophy around how applications should be actually built, around how applications should be tested and how they should be deployed, so that we can make sure that we are deploying these services at a great velocity. And this is where we have the focus upon various delivery pipelines, like building the project, testing the project, releasing the project, and making sure that the organizations are basically be able to follow up on that. So this is how the whole DevOps practices started. Initially, people who were implementing these DevOps practices, they were called as DevOps engineers. Even though the exact terminology is wrong, DevOps isn't exactly a job role. It's just a cultural philosophy that companies happen to implement. And this problem actually came up with one of the first companies which actually acquired this was Google, because Google had large scale distributed systems that were working across different regions, different nodes, and all of that. Like even if you see a project like Kubernetes today, Google had actually implemented Kubernetes much before in its own company, which they call as Borg. So you can see like Google is doing things that people have actually thought about almost half a decade later. So Google came up with these DevOps practices and they wanted a way to implement these DevOps practices. So they basically invented a job role within their own company, which they call as site reliability engineering. So site reliability engineering isn't something that is different from DevOps. It's actually a functionality role for engineers who are implementing DevOps practices. That's what I would basically call it. Now, this is a very controversial take because a lot of people still think that DevOps and SREs are completely different roles. There are also separate roles that are coming up, which is called as production engineers. Like I have worked upon, like there is production engineers, there is platform engineers. There are a myriad of stuff that are exactly doing the same thing, making sure that the developers have the necessary tools, necessary operational requirements so that they can ship their applications fast. So Google initially created this site reliability engineer role. Various other companies like LinkedIn and Microsoft, like basically they picked up on this role itself. Facebook changed the requirements of this role from site reliability to production engineering. And now we see that a lot of different companies out there have started adopting similar titles altogether. So as I said before, SRE is not against DevOps, or like SRE and DevOps are not exactly different. Rather, SRE is a functionality role which actually implements DevOps. And there are various scopes to like what SRE is basically doing. The very first one is actually reducing those organization silos. Right now, like silos are okay, that's perfectly fine, but we don't want these silos to act in such a manner that they don't communicate with each other. So the very first thing that the SREs basically do is making sure that these silos communicate with each other. They make sure that they are kept in loop about anything that is happening on the application, about any of the requirements that are changing so that they can be kept upon the same page. Next one is that they actually implement these gradual changes. Previously, as I said before, developers used to create the project first in their own silo itself. And once they develop this project, they used to send it back to the QA. And most of the times, QA used to come up with like $1,000 or $1,500 or $2,000 that the developers have to fix within a specified period of time. So instead of shipping the whole application together to the QA team or to the operations team, what about making some small incremental changes so that we can send it out to the people so that they can check it out, they can test it, and they can release it so that the clients can exactly start testing out that feature. So this is what SRE basically provides to the developers as well. Then they leverage tooling, they leverage automation to make sure that all of the common use cases are automated so that they don't have to spend any man hours on that. And finally, they measure everything. So there is separate concept of SLAs, which is basically service level agreements. There is SLOs. There are various metrics that the SREs need to take care of. And all of these metrics are communicated back with the management, with the business folks, so that they can make sure that what sort of performance are the SRE team basically achieving. Now, there are obviously some differences between DevOps and the SRE itself, because SRE teams have to take care about a lot of different things as well. So like in case of SRE, there are separate metrics that is called as mean time to recovery, mean time to detect, to make sure that they can keep the production up and running, even in case of any inevitability. Like the server went down, but they still need to make sure that the server is getting up on time and it doesn't affect a lot of customers. And this is something that doesn't exactly fall into the scope of DevOps. The focus of DevOps is to basically make sure that the cost of development and maintenance is reduced. Engineering teams should have a shorter release cycle. And finally, there is a heavy focus upon automated and continuous testing and continuous deployment. So I guess that pretty much sums up like the difference between SRE and DevOps and the similarities as well. But I guess at the end of the day, it is totally upon how the company sees this particular role and what exactly do they want to achieve with this. Like for example, in my own company, we don't have any SRE, we don't have any DevOps. It is entirely upon software engineers who have to implement these kind of things themselves. So at the end of the day, it is totally up to the companies. And DevOps is something that a lot of students are trying to get into right now, which is quite appreciable because we get to see that they are getting to know about a lot of different tools, a lot of different technologies. But at the same time, try to understand the purpose of DevOps and don't just see this as a fancy new tooling or a fancy new job role that you might be expecting. So yeah, I guess that pretty much sums it.
Thank you so much for for clearing this confusion between SRE and DevOps. Many students have this confusion. So,
Yeah.
sir, as you said, that many students want have an interest in this field of DevOps. So, what
Mhm.
suggestions do you have for the beginners who want to develop a career in this field?
Sure. So one of my first suggestions for beginners who want to develop a career in SRE or DevOps or platform engineering, whatever you're choosing to be, is to actually spend some time learning programming. Because I have talked to a lot of people who are starting out with DevOps. Most of the situations have been like, we saw someone's YouTube video, they have been saying like DevOps pays this much, and now we want to become DevOps engineers. And there is this common misconception that if you're trying to do DevOps or if you're trying to get into SRE or platform engineering or whatever you are choosing to become, you don't exactly have to do a lot of coding after all, which is simply untrue. Because if you happen to get into any of the SRE or any of the platform engineering roles, you will be spending a lot of your time, a lot of your free time developing some internal tools that the companies can exactly be able to use. I can give you one example of that. I was working at HackerRank almost like last year itself, like back when I was doing a 6 months internship over there. So in HackerRank, we had two different teams. One team was responsible for DevOps practices. The other team was responsible for platform engineering. So in case of DevOps team, they actually developed something that was pretty interesting. So every HackerRank engineer had a Mac, and this is what we were using to develop all our toolings and all our products. But the problem was that our products were simply quite heavy for even for our own Mac machines to basically like manage. And this is when we started using this is when we started using a tool that actually allows us to develop our applications on a Kubernetes cluster. So all that we need to do is to basically connect our machines to that Kubernetes cluster, set up our IDE or a code editor or whatever you're using. And now you can actually build, test, and deploy your application by the Kubernetes clusters itself, which has access to all of the cloud APIs that we were using. So this actually helped us achieve the efficiency in quite a lot way, because now developers did not have to spend any sort of a time setting those projects up on their local machine. All that they needed to do was to just click a single button, and their project was set up upon cloud. And now they can use the cloud itself to develop, deploy, and test their projects. So this is something that the DevOps teams actually built out, and this actually accelerated the whole process of development. So if you remember what I said about DevOps, the primary focus of DevOps is to make sure that engineers are able to ship their applications in quite a fast manner. Now, we had a platform team as well, and this platform team was working on completely different aspects. And this was something that I was a part of. So we were developing out IDs within HackerRank. I guess a lot of people who have used HackerRank, they know what HackerRank is about. Uh, HackerRank is about like giving you access to programming questions so that you can solve them out. But the real business use case for HackerRank is HackerRank for Work. Like that's our premium product. And this is what interviewers basically use to interview candidates. So if I'm an interviewer and let's say Devalina is an interviewee and I'm testing her upon her front end skills, I can just create a front end interview. I will have a cloud ID, which I can share to her. And we can use this to like basically test her skills out there. So we were building out these IDs. And now the problem was that we wanted to make sure that these IDs are rolled out in a continuous manner. So we were building out a lot of different IDs altogether. Like there was Java ID, there was Flutter ID, there was C Sharp ID, and all of those things. So this was something that was facilitated by platform engineering role, and it involved a lot of code after all. So don't just think that by getting into DevOps or by getting into site reliability engineering or getting into platform engineering, you will simply skip upon coding altogether. So coding is still a very great aspect of all of these things. And you should really try to invest in some, like, let's say, a dynamic language or maybe a static language or whatever you think is good for you, so that you will have some real world intuition into how applications are actually developed. Once you do that, try to learn about some automation. And automation is something that fascinates a lot of people still. Like, for example, I'm the maintainer of one of the largest automation projects on GitHub. So automation is something that I was really associated with from early times itself. So automation is something that you can easily learn. You can basically learn Python, you can learn Bash, or maybe you can learn some obscure languages like Perl and all of these things. And you can get to see like how automation can really make things quite easy for you. Once you understand software development, once you understand automation, now is the time for you to learn some specific tools. So let us say you develop some application out there and now you want to make sure that this application is being deployed continuously. So what you can do is like, you can basically go ahead, you can Dockerize your complete project. So Docker is a separate tool that allows you to put your entire application inside a container. You can Dockerize your project. Next, what you can do is like, you can set up a CI/CD pipeline. So every time you make a commit to your project, it triggers a pipeline that builds your entire project, runs the test, makes sure that everything is working right, and pushes your application to the deployment. For the deployment, you can look into some cloud providers. There is AWS, there is Azure, there is GCP, and there are various particular services out there. Like on GCP, there is App Engine. Uh, there on AWS, there is Elastic Beanstalk, there is Elastic Compute Cloud, and all of these things that can exactly allow you to set up your applications out there. You can also learn about infrastructure as a code tooling. Basically, these frameworks allows you to create your own cloud infrastructure using some particular configuration language. And this is how you can basically go about learning DevOps on a case-by-case basis. So pick up on one simple thing and try to deliver on that, and then you will exactly see the value that you're getting from all of these DevOps practices. And once you happen to start upon that, there is no going back. Every time you will come across a lot of different tools, a lot of different technologies that is solving a complete different use case for you. Like for example, when I was working at a different company altogether, we had this utility of scanning these Docker images before we actually put them out on the production. So since we wanted to do something like that, we started looking out into different tools. And this is where we found out different tools like Trivi or Sneak that allows us to scan the container images. So there is no manner in which you can learn all of these DevOps toolings at one single time. What you should instead try to do is to learn them upon a case-by-case basis. There are a lot of different situations, a lot of different cases where you can apply these DevOps practices. So just pick up on them, start implementing those cases, and in this way, you will get access and exposure to a lot of different DevOps practices and also different DevOps toolings altogether. I guess that helps.
Thank you, sir. This clears a lot of problem in this domain of DevOps and also in the SRE.
Mhm.
So the next question that I would like to ask you is that we know that you have been a part of Google Summer of Code. So
Mhm.
can you share your experience on Google Summer of Code?
Sure, definitely. So as I mentioned before getting into Google Summer of Code, I had some really good experience with my internships and with all of the open source programs that I participated in. So Google Summer of Code was a real shocker for me because the organization that I wanted to participate with was not selected. So even before the contributors start applying, the organizations need to apply themselves, and they need to get selected before contributors start applying to these specific organizations. So I was pretty like bamboozled when I came to know that my organization was not selected because I had some really good plans of participating with that particular organization itself. So I was completely lost, and this is when I came across one of the folks who was working at my company. So back then I was working at Red Hat. So one of the Red Hat engineers actually motivated me to like just to go ahead, find a new organization and start preparing for it. So there is this common misconception about Google Summer of Code is that unless and until you're contributing to one specific organization for months and months, they won't really consider you out. And that's a pretty wrong misconception. I was selected into GSOC within just 30 days of my start with that particular organization. And my mentors and the organization admin that I was working with were quite impressed with the kind of work that I did. So once I came to know that if I just happened to sulk and be sad about that my organization was not selected, nothing would exactly happen. So I started going ahead. I started finding out different organizations, and this is when I found about Metacall. So Metacall was a new organization to the whole Google Summer of Code, and they had a really interesting project. So I was like, okay, let's go ahead with this. Let's start talking with the mentors, with the org admin. And by joining itself, I simply made my intentions clear that I really want to contribute to the organization and I want to be a part of the Google Summer of Code. And this clarity in my thought process actually brought me a lot of benefits because from the start itself, I got a mentor assigned to me. And he was the one who was guiding me throughout that, okay, this is how you should be writing a proposal. This is how you should try to create a proof of concept. And this is how you should try to contribute to some of the already existing Metacall projects. So I did all of that. And the really interesting part was about creating a proof of concept. Metacall was not a very popular organization back then. And they simply had no way to basically test whether a candidate is good with the things that they know about or not. So they asked every applicant to basically make a proof of concept to exactly showcase that this project will simply work out. Like just a simple proof of concept, nothing more than 100 or 200 lines of code. And this was something that I nailed. And I started making out my proposal, which was quite good, especially in my own view. And as soon as the whole application period started, I just happened to submit my proposal, and I just waited with like cross fingers. But the really interesting part happened was once the application period got over. So this is called the turkey cold part, because everyone is staying silent. Everyone is just contemplating like what will be the outcome of the whole GSOC process, or whether the proposal will be selected or not. But I actually took up this opportunity to start applying, to start contributing to my organization even further. So I took up a really small mini project kind of stuff. I delivered upon that, and this actually impressed my mentor and my organization admin quite well. And as soon as the results came, it was almost a no-brainer for me that I was selected in the whole project. So my project was about developing something that's called as an inter-language function call between Python and Node.js. Imagine writing a function in Python and basically calling that function from your JavaScript code. This was something that I was exactly working upon, and it was really a fun project. So I happened to complete upon that quite successfully, and the whole GSOC period was quite successful for me. So I guess that pretty much details my experience with GSOC after all.
Okay, sir. Thank you. It was
Mhm.
great hearing about your GSOC experience. Sir,
Yeah.
you know that Diversion is conducting an offline hackathon this year. So
Mhm.
you are also known to be an hackathon enthusiast, and as you have won several hackathons in the past. So what
Mhm.
advice would you like to give to students who are also into hackathons and also want to develop a career in cybersecurity later?
So I don't have any experience with cybersecurity, unfortunately. So I would be able to speak upon that. But regarding hackathon, I guess the single advice that I would say is don't try to slap your solutions onto non-existent problems. And this is a common theme that I see with a lot of hackathons that I have judged or mentored. I go to a hackathon, I see that some projects have came up with a project. This project does some really naive thing, and now they have developed a pretty ambitious problem on upon that project itself. And this is a classic situation where you try to write a solution without even knowing the question. So again, a lot of people are doing a lot of different things, and they happen to develop some of their own hobby projects or some of their own personal projects, but don't try to pass it off as a hackathon project. Hackathon, in essence, is a place where you actually hack around some common problems that a lot of common people might face. So developing applications or developing projects even before you have figured out a problem is not the way of doing it. So the very first step that you should actually try, like in any hackathon, is to figure out a common problem that a lot of people are facing. And this problem doesn't need to be something that should be exactly monetized, like applications like Zomato or Swiggy. These are traditional consumer-driven applications. You don't exactly need to have a business model behind the application. You don't exactly need to have any way of monetizing the project, but it should be something that solves the pain point of one common person, at least one common person. And once you figure that out, try to think about the different technologies or the different ways in which you can actually fix that problem. So in the past, I have figured out a lot of different unique problems that a lot of people have built some unique solutions around. And I guess these are the projects that actually go ahead and win these kind of hackathons. So first, have a really solid proposal, like have a really solid problem statement. Try to think about different ways in which you can solve the problem, because if you're walking the judges or the mentors through how they can exactly go about solving that specific problem, and what are the different solutions that they contemplated, and why they think that this current solution is the best one out there, I guess you would have won the hackathon over there itself. The technologies, the pitch that you're doing is just secondary over there, but just showcasing to them that you really care about the problem and that you have thought about it in a completely different angles and different perspectives altogether, that is simply more than enough. But apart from that, there is the pitch where you have to showcase like why this solution is exactly the best one. And no matter how fancy technologies you're using, no matter if you're using some really obscure framework or a tooling or a library, it doesn't matter. I have literally seen people who have used some Figma presentations, Figma mocks to exactly win a hackathon. So I can talk about this one experience beforehand where I made this one common mistake. So we had to build out a project. We had initially thought that, okay, we are going to build out a project that is going to use machine learning and that is going to use Web3. This was one of the stupidest thing that I have done in my entire college life. So we started building out a project, and this was to actually incentivize college boys to like basically get some credits so that they can clean their rooms. So imagine having a mobile application, and you can basically use that mobile application to click the pictures of your dorm rooms, which are basically very untidy. I guess most of the college boys might be able to relate to that. And if your college room is clean, and it is like tidy and all of that, you will basically get some cryptocurrency. So we even developed our own cryptocurrency built upon Ethereum itself. So you will get that cryptocurrency and you can use that to basically get some snaps or get some other things altogether. So we built out a mobile application using React Native. We built out our own cryptocurrency using Solidity. We built out a machine learning model so that it can actually predict if your room is clean and tidy or if your room is unclean and all of that. We went to the hackathon and we got a beating from a project that had actually implemented something using Figma itself. And we were like pretty mad about it. But once we thought and once we contemplated about it quite deeply, we came to realize that we did something that is pretty wrong. We thought about what we were going to use beforehand. We thought about the solution beforehand. And all that we needed was one single problem statement that can satisfy the solution, which is not exactly the case. The team that actually won that hackathon had really good things in the place. They had a solid proposal. They had a solid problem statement. They had a solid pitch, and they had a solid presentation about how they're exactly be able to solve that given project. And even though they had not developed something in real, it was simply a Figma prototype. You can just click on a button, you can just see what the different screens are, and that is it. But still, they actually convinced the judges that this is how things should really look like. And I guess that's a pretty convincing part of any hackathon. A hackathon is essentially a mini Shark Tank itself. People don't really care about the different technologies you're using or how fancy your application is. They care about the idea that you have, the solution that you have developed, and why you think that this is a winning solution. And I guess that pretty much sums it up.
Thank you, sir. The experience that you shared was very good, and I know that many students can relate to that as well. Sir, the next question that I would like to ask you is that you say that you have been a software development intern in HackerRank. So, can you share some of your experience in HackerRank as well?
So I guess that would have been covered by Andy and all of that. I guess that's the usual stuff that happens with a lot of companies. But again, HackerRank, like for people like who are aspiring to work at a company like, let's say, HackerRank has a stupendous internship program, especially for people who are in their undergraduate right now. And the good thing is that HackerRank simply doesn't only hire like SD interns. They even hire quality assurance interns. They hire content writer interns. They hire product management interns, and they even hire design interns as well. And I guess with HackerRank, you will get to work upon one of the most impactful products that the whole Indian startup scene has actually built out. So HackerRank might not be a unicorn, but still it has quite a great user base. It is a great product. And it's something that where you will actually get to see the kind of the impact that you can get from your work. So I joined HackerRank, I guess, back in January 2022, and I was working with the editors and the platform team. So editors team was the one that is responsible for building out IDEs, and platform team are the ones that is building out separate tooling, separate libraries that can facilitate the other teams within HackerRank to ship their stuff onto the production. So it was pretty much a great experience because you have to coordinate with a lot of different people altogether. You're simply not only answering to your manager, you're also like checking out the designs, you're also checking out, let's say, the quality assurance. You're also checking out like how the whole metrics and how your project is being tracked and what sort of impact your work is basically bringing in. And the most glorious aspect about HackerRank is that within the first week itself, you have to put some code onto the production. Like that's the golden benchmark that you need to satisfy. So I guess like once you join HackerRank, within 3 or 4 days, you will have a session with the CTO himself, and he will guide you on how to make a contribution to the HackerRank's primary code base. And this will actually make sure that your contributions are reflected to the HackerRank's website from day one itself. And this is one of the greatest parts about HackerRank because it gives you enough enforcement so that you can be really confident about your engineering skills and that you can also get to see the kind of impact that you are bringing out in a particular project. Uh, HackerRank also had this one unique challenge about building an intern's website. So if you actually go on, let's say, Google search and you actually search for HackerRank intern website, you will get to see the different websites that we have built in each and every batch, which will actually give you a very good walkthrough about what are the things that we have accomplished. So we usually have these bets with the CTO himself about how fast we can actually develop this intern websites. And it is actually a very good sort of a mini hackathon inside the company itself, because now you have to coordinate with like, let's say 15 to 20 different interns that you are a part with so that you can actually ship the whole thing onto the production. But yes, I guess that pretty much was about the HackerRank internship. I guess a lot of people have written different blogs about it altogether. I guess there is one blog of mine which can actually detail about my internship experience quite a bit. So I can maybe share it with you, Debalina, on the private chat, and you can maybe put this on the live chat itself. Yeah, I
Yeah,
guess this
sure.
was a blog. Cool. Yep. So that was it about my HackerRank's internship experience. So I guess HackerRank has already hired interns for this winter batch. But if you're someone who is in their second year or maybe even third year of studies right now, you can definitely try looking out to apply for this summer internship batch, because I guess that would start around, let's say, May or June or maybe even July. And I guess that would be a pretty good experience for you over there.
Thank you, sir, for sharing your HackerRank experience. And I know that many out there who are watching this live stream also aim to work in platforms like HackerRank later.
Mhm.
So, lastly, I have a question that we know that you are presently in LocalStack. So,
Mhm.
why did you choose LocalStack?
Okay, so why did you choose LocalStack? Because it was the best option that I had back when I graduated. So one thing that I have seen in my past experiences, like in whatever companies I have worked with, is that like most of the projects that I have worked upon has a very significant impact upon developer toolings. So a lot of people don't understand what developer toolings are, because most of the time we are just familiar with B2B or B2C and like these kind of applications, like applications where you either interact with the business or you either interact with the customers and all of those things. Local Stack, along with a lot of different startups that are being created out there, are focused upon a completely different section, and that are developers. So even as developers, we are using a lot of different tools, we are using a lot of different libraries, and some of these might not be paid right now, but eventually when you get into the corporate, you will get to see that some of these things are entirely offered on a paid basis. Like for example, let's say you are using AWS in your company right now. AWS is a cloud service provider, and a lot of different services that it provides, a lot of different APIs that it gives to you, all of them are on a paid basis. So you're actually offering something to the AWS itself to basically use those services and use those APIs. So in a similar manner, dev tools or basically developer tooling startups are on a boom right now, because they're happening to create products and tools and services so that developers can basically be more efficient. If you remember what I said about DevOps, DevOps is a practice to accelerate the developer velocity. In a similar manner, LocalStack does the exact the same thing, but it is focused upon local cloud emulation. Now, for anyone who has actually got some introduction into AWS or GCP, like let us say you're using some AWS services out there. So there are S3 buckets, there are EC2 instances, there are, let's say, ECS containers. So there are a lot of AWS services that you have to pay for if you want to use. Now, there is a problem with this. Let us say you're trying to test something locally. Like, let us say you're trying to build out an application. You need to have some S3 buckets. Let's say you need to have some Lambda functions. And for this local development and testing as well, you have to pay something to the AWS. And that is a problematic thing, because let us say you're facing some bug, and now you have to create multiple Lambda functions or multiple S3 buckets, or let's say even multiple EC2 containers and whatnot. And all of this is costing money. And this actually leads a lot of companies to basically spend a lot upon their local development and testing. So there was a report that was published by one of the founders at Basecamp, and they actually announced that they are exactly moving away from AWS to having their own cloud infrastructure. And that's a pretty big thing, because in the past 20 years, not a lot of companies have actually developed their own in-house infrastructure. Most of them have migrated to the cloud infrastructure itself, because they think that it is cheaper and it is much more manageable than having your own in-house infrastructure. But if you actually happen to see in the reports, you will get to see that a lot of this is happening because of local cloud development and testing reasons. Like developers create a lot of different local resources, a lot of different cloud resources for their local development and testing purposes, and this doesn't exactly scale. Most of them are simply left upon the cloud providers itself, and this actually racks up a quite a big billing amount to the company once they have to pay it back to the cloud service providers. So local stack provides all of these services locally itself. Like imagine working out with S3 buckets on your local machine without even having to connect to AWS. Or imagine creating Lambda functions on your local machine without even having to connect to AWS. I guess this is what LocalStack facilitates by giving you a completely local cloud stack. And LocalStack is an open source project. So you can to go to the LocalStack's open source code base. You can check about like what are the things that we're working out and how big our code base is. And I guess I pretty much was sold upon the idea of LocalStack and the kind of things that it wanted to achieve. So this was the reason I chose LocalStack to work with after my graduation. And I guess LocalStack as a startup is a place where I can stay for quite many years right now, if all the conditions are basically working out quite good for me, because it's a developer tooling. A lot of developers love the project. You get to see the impact of the kind of work that you're doing. And eventually it is trying to make sure that we are building out a paradigm. We are not just offering a service, or we are not just offering a tool or technology out there. We are offering a completely different paradigm that developers should have the control upon their own development and testing environment. They should not they should not give the control to cloud service providers, because they are expensive, and they should be exactly used only for production use cases, not for local development or for local testing. So yeah, I guess that was pretty much it, why I chose LocalStack after all.
Thank you so much for answering to the questions and like explaining them in detail, because many students have many confusions regarding a lot of things, and I know that many of their confusion has been cleared. So now I'd
Mhm.
like to jump into the QA session, and we already have some questions from
Yep.
some participants. So the first question from the participant is that what is the role of AWS and cloud in DevOps?
So again, as I mentioned when I was explaining how you should be learning DevOps, there would be like a step in the whole DevOps learning where you have to pick up on a specific cloud service provider. It can be AWS, it can be Azure, it can be GCP. And now the thing with these cloud service providers is that they provide a lot of different APIs to you. They provide a lot of different services to you so that you can accelerate your own DevOps practices. I can take an example for that. In AWS, we have got something that is called as Cloud Formation. Cloud Formation is an infrastructure as a code framework. And when I say infrastructure as a code, it basically means that Cloud Formation has its own like it has its own syntax, which you can write on your own so that you can define your own infrastructure in a declarative manner. So you can basically tell the Cloud Formation in a programmatic manner that please create these resources for me so that I can start accessing them out. So imagine just having an application, having a set and specific infrastructure for that, and you can use CloudFormation to instantly declare this infrastructure and create this infrastructure without having to click on multiple buttons, and instantly delete this infrastructure as well. I guess this is what a lot of different a lot of different of these cloud service providers are basically providing. So in a lot of companies, you will find that DevOps engineers or platform engineers or SRE engineers, they are basically spending a lot of their time upon these cloud service providers as well, around working out with different set of APIs or different set of services or whatever functionalities that they are providing, so that they can make sure that the developer velocity doesn't slow down, and they are able to ship out everything in a really consistent manner. So if you're someone who is looking to get into cloud computing and AWS and all of that, there are a lot of good resources out there, but maybe first start with the basics. Maybe first learn about what an S3 bucket is, or what EC2 is, or what a virtual private cloud is, and how different AWS services work out together. And then you will get to see like, okay, this is how I can integrate these cloud service providers into my DevOps practices altogether. I guess that answers the question.
Thank you, sir, for solving this doubt. And I guess Uma, her doubt has been solved as well. So the next question we have is from Cloud Lover. He has asked that are DevOps and continuous delivery the same thing?
Not exactly. DevOps might also integrate continuous integration as well. So basically, what we colloquially call as a CI/CD. So as I said before, DevOps is not a tool. DevOps is not a technology. DevOps is not even a job role. It is rather a set of practices, and it is rather a cultural philosophy that integrates development, operations, and all of the different components all together. Like for example, there is security as well. And since security is something that is always missed out in the DevOps practices, most of the people have started calling it DevSecOps. Now there is business as well, and some people have even started calling it as BizDevOps. So in short, we have a lot of different components altogether. There is QA, there is security, there is business, there is sales. And you can consider that DevOps is kind of bringing all of these different functionalities together in a single unit so that the clients or the people like who are using the application can be really confident, and even the developer velocity is never impacted by how you're developing your complete software suite. So no, it is not exactly the same. Rather, continuous delivery happens to be a part of DevOps itself, but it also encompasses a lot of different things altogether. But continuous delivery happens to be one of the most significant parts of it, as I mentioned before.
Thank you, sir, for solving this doubt. The next doubt we
Mhm.
have is that you mentioned something about GCOC. So the question is that Google Summer of Code is around the corner. I am a
Mhm.
full stack developer. Can you provide some tips to write a good application and choosing a good project?
Whenever someone asks me like this question, that how should I write a proposal or how should I like write a good application and all of that, there is only one single place that I can think of, and that's the GSOC guide. So I can maybe share this to you on the private chat. You can maybe link it out in the like the chat itself. And I guess this is one of the most like fun pieces that has actually been released out by Google open source, because it tackles this whole situation in a humorous manner, and it is dead honest about what you should be really expecting from GSOC and how to write a good proposal and how to choose the right organization. If you happen to read this whole thing in an entire like basis, I guess you would have no second questions about how the GSOC should look like, how to write a good proposal, and how to make sure that you are able to get selected into any one of the organizations. So just give it a read and make sure that you don't have any doubts left out of that.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Tondrima. In Google season of docs, the organization selects technical writers on the basis of only proposals or doing prior contribution on organizations, which would help to get selected more easily. So this was the question that she had asked. Okay.
Sure. So Google Season of Docs is a pretty interesting case, because unlike Google Summer of Code, Google Season of Docs has no strict eligibility criteria, and they don't even have like a singular platform where they accept the proposals from everyone. GSOT has a completely decentralized hiring process. So that means that every organization has its own way of selecting people out there. Now, there are some organizations like, let's say, Simpai. Simpai selects people beforehand itself. They don't even wait for their status as a GSOT organization to be confirmed. They say beforehand that, okay, this is the person that we would exactly be continuing with. In case of in case of other organizations like, let's say, Lightning AI, not Lightning AI, I guess it's called PyTorch Lightning. Then there is Julia. Then there is NumPy. I guess most of these organizations might conduct a very serious hiring process. They might give you some assignments, they might conduct some interviews, and through that itself, they will confirm if you are really competent enough to participate with them. There are some other organizations that might just ask you to like write a proposal, and it should be a really exhaustive proposal about whatever you want to do. And I guess that would make your intentions clear about how serious you are about your Google Season of Docs application. While there are some other organizations that will just select you based upon the gut feeling. They might have had a conversation with you, they might have conducted a few interviews with you, and based upon that, they might end up selecting you after all. So there is no fixed way in which you can get selected into GSOT. The best thing that I should suggest is like, make sure that you are ready to write a proposal if an organization requests you for one. Be ready to give some interviews as well, or be ready to like solve some of the assignments that they're able to provide. But at the end of the day, have a really solid proof of work, like have some really good technical blogs or some technical documentation projects. Because if you have these kind of proof of work, I guess the organization might be able to put a lot of confidence into you as a qualified candidate. I guess that should just help out.
That I think summarizes the questions that we have for today. I would like the participants that if they have any more questions to our guest, they can ask it right now. Otherwise, we'll move to the concluding ceremony.
I guess we can move to the concluding ceremony right now.
Yeah, we'll move to the concluding ceremony then. Sir, thank you so much for giving such good advice to all the students, and also thank you so much for solving everyone's doubt and sharing a lot about your experience as well. And I know that students would really appreciate and like this session that they had. So this is a small, I'd like to share a small certificate of appreciation from our side, and later it would be mailed to you as well.
Thank you. Thanks for the kind gesture, and thanks for having me for this session.